Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. I'm with Aaron Donaldson tonight. We are going to discuss national news of the day. Of course, the biggest news of the past week nationally is Manchin. Finally, it all came apart. Manchin says is a firm no, 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 no. I don't know why it took him so long to do this. Basically, he said that he is not going to agree to the child tax credit being only 1 year because he says everybody knows that once we extend it a year, everybody's going to want to extend it 10 years. Even the Republicans will be afraid to oppose it. So it's really 10 years. So he wanted that to be factored in as 10 years. Of course, if it was factored in as 10 years, the 1.7 billion, that takes up about 1.4 billion, and there's no room for anything else, and he wasn't going to agree to any more than 1.7 billion. So basically he wanted everything else, pre-K, and anything about climate change taken out of the bill if we were going to have child tax credit. He really didn't want child tax credit for some reason. And so basically, unless something magic happens, child tax credit is going to stop in a couple of weeks, maybe in just a week. All of those checks people have been getting are just going to stop. The market actually got shaken by that. Goldman Sachs is lowering its GDP forecast because of that, because that's a lot of money that's going to be not going to be spent. Maybe it'll have an impact on inflation. We don't know. But at any rate, Build Back Better for now is dead in the water. President Biden said this morning that Joe Manchin and I are going to get it done. Nobody knows what that means, if it's just something he's saying, but everybody else is really upset. The squad are saying, this is why we needed to keep it tethered to the infrastructure bill. We had no leverage, and blaming the Democratic Party leadership for, promising that a promise had been made. Other people are saying that Manchin broke his word. And the Republicans are trying to entice Manchin to switch party. They're calling you a liar now. Why are you going to put up with that? Why don't you switch parties? Manchin is upset with that and the media coverage. He stormed out of a couple of, they weren't really press coverages. Reporters are following him around, and he just got angry. He said, "I'm not negotiating with you." Basically, it took the pressure off of cinema, of course, but I guess he was really upset that he was being told he was the only one. Aaron, what have you got to say on the subject?
It's just such a fascinating and hot mess that he has really manufactured, I think, he and Sinema both, by just wanting to not abandon the party and to face the storm that comes with that choice that they are both making, but clearly not being willing to vote on what is an otherwise very, very popular bill. Many would say a very, very necessary bill. One of my predictions back in November was that the so-called squad, would blink first and that they would decouple this from the budget fight, and that would probably be the end of the bill. There are frequent times I hate being right about certain things, and I think that this is one of them. I think they're very right to say that they've lost all their leverage by doing that. The child tax credit is a really good example of where it's cutting off your nose in spite of your face. This is popular nationwide. This is a value-added provision. This puts money back into our economy at a time of slowdown. We'll be talking about the effects of Omicron here in just a minute. Manchin says he's concerned about inflation, but this increases people's access to work. This puts limits on drug prices. This increases access to housing. All three of these have been predicted to decrease inflation. So he's actually like losing this argument. Doing nothing on many of these issues is in fact driving inflation. And so by not voting for this, he's again just really, really hurting himself. The last thing I would say about Manchin is he's a very good example, especially on climate change. One of the things that I say as a debate educator is that in states of crisis, moderation is a kind of extremism. And I think Manchin is a good example of that, someone who likes to play the middle and claim that he is a moderate. But we're talking about circumstances of crisis, and in particular, climate change. He says he doesn't want to uproot our whole economy, but all of the top scientists all over the world are saying that is what we have to do facing the existential threat that we are facing. So that kind of moderation is its own form of extremism. I don't know. I think it's really, really unfortunate that this is where he took everybody.
If he was worried about inflation, he should have called for a reduction in the military budget. I mean, $768 billion, and that is inflationary spending. And not only that, Congress added $25 billion to, I commented on this last week, to keep up with inflation. So you got 25 billion causing inflation it's supposed to keep up with. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous, but no talks about reducing that. And that's inflationary spending. That's 760 billion that has to be spent in the next year. Whereas this was going to be spread out over 10 years. It would have no effect on inflation at worst.
And worth really mentioning, too, that when it comes to military spending, the waste and the loss on that is really, really well known and well documented. Whereas when it comes to spending on things like the child tax credit, one of the things Manchin keeps saying is that we're giving too many things like this to people that are too wealthy, basically saying that we're kind of like wasting this money. Yet he votes on a defense bill that leads to, millions, if not billions of dollars just lost to corporations like Boeing and Raytheon. Yeah, it's really weird that that's the line that he's taking with this bill in particular.
He didn't like it. He doesn't like the climate change, the climate change mitigation measures because he is a fossil fuel person. Right. He wanted most of the tax breaks out. He didn't even like what was still in there. I mean, he just doesn't even want anything that's going to support sustainable energy that's not coal or oil. He just doesn't want it. And, even though he's supporting natural gas, and really, if anything has killed coal, it's been natural gas, but, more than all the environmental legislation put together. But that's, but never mind that. He absolutely has not wanted to have that. I think this is his way of killing it. I think he went back thinking it was clever. He was the one who demanded that it be reduced to 1 year. He was the one who demanded that. And then he goes, I think he went back to the people who owns them. I'm sorry. And they said, what are you doing? It's going to be renewed, and they just, and then he goes, and comes back and says, no, it's got to be 10 years or nothing. And, and of course, that it's just absolutely ridiculous. He knew that, knowing that would kill the bill, because there's no way they can do that. There's no way. And, and it's just, it was, anyway, nobody's going to trust him now. I mean, his word is mud, and the Republicans want him just so that they can flip, have McConnell be the majority leader again, but they wouldn't trust him. Who would trust him? It's just there. The other thing I want to say about it is there are talks about bypassing him. Romney actually had his own child credit bill, which actually would make use of Social Security rather than the IRS for it. And I actually took a look at it this morning. I actually prefer it. This one, it actually is more beneficial to the beneficiaries. I hope they do that. And then come back and talk about Build Back Better and give Manchin, another chance to at least do something. I don't know, but it's just if they can get Romney to switch for one. But again, who knows? Maybe Sinema will tank the whole thing too. The Democrats just have to figure they never had 50. By the way, the squad did vote against the infrastructure bill, but the rest of the caucus under Priya Powell, I always mispronounce her name, did vote for the infrastructure bill and let it go.
It's been the capitulation that a lot of the progressives in Congress have predicted. It's really, really hard for folks like Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders to work with the Democratic Party because their politics are an existential threat to that party. And climate change is a really good example of where they come with evidence-driven reform, but that reform threatens the donation base to the Democratic Party. And Manchin and Sinema, and in many other instances, you see the rubber meet the road there. I just want to reiterate, I think you're right. No one's going to trust Manchin on this. I think that the Democrats' mandate has been completely washed, and it's totally by their own design. Politicians don't like to put up with blowback for unpopular decisions. He keeps running away. It is his job to face his constituents when he makes an unpopular decision and to stand by that decision or to change his mind. And he's trying to have it both ways, and it's making everything much worse.
The last point before we go to the next topic is the irony is who he's hurting are the moderates who are going to have tough elections because they don't have much to run on.
Nope.
They needed this more.
Republicans themselves are running on money from the previous budget that we passed, and we know for a fact they would do the same thing if this bill passed, and so would Manchin, and so would the other people that are up for election.
Okay, that takes us to the next topic.
The Court of Appeals here in Washington has ruled quickly in our favor. We are getting a clearer picture of what happened, who was involved and who paid for it, and where the money went.
Mr. Meadows received numerous text messages, which he has produced without any privilege claim, imploring that Mr. Trump take the specific action we all knew his duty required.
We do not take this vote lightly, but this committee and this Congress is left with no other alternative when, in the midst of an investigation of this magnitude, we are stonewalled at every turn by those who played a central role in the planning and execution of the January 6th attack.
The committee favorably report to the House the committee's report on a resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Mark Randall Meadows in contempt of Congress.
All right, we're going to have a couple segments about January 6th, a lot heating up with the January 6th committee. Actually, some fresh news out just before I came here, but of course, Representative Perry is refusing. He is the first congressman that they are approaching for information. As we know, Meadows is no longer cooperating. Too late. He already gave everybody his stuff. I mean, it's just all they were asking him for was to be able to answer questions about it. He's in trouble. He's got a lot of problems, and now apparently he's on the outs with Trump, who doesn't want anything to do with him because he's already hurt Trump, right? I mean, it's just I think he is really got problems, and he may be have already given too much to be able to claim any type of confidentiality. But we've got Meadows, we've got people that are in there talking. We don't even know what's being said. They're looking bolder and bolder. Liz Cheney is just making comments after comments. We've got those emails that have embarrassed Fox News people, and a lot of people talking about, well, Chris Cuomo got in trouble for helping his brother out, giving him advice, and yet we've got these emails of Fox News people sending Trump advice, or at least Meadows. What about that? Journalistic integrity questioning. What? Not even talking about that, right? Granted, it was good advice. Shut this thing down. But it was still advice. It was their objectivity is in question, and so it's. But everybody knows that they weren't objective to begin with. But it's stating the obvious. But Perry is somebody who's been involved as one of the architects of it. And they were asking him to come and ask questions. They haven't subpoenaed him yet, so it's not like he's in defiance. The question is whether they will, or whether they're just going to actually go and try to get information somewhere else before they come to that. Today they've asked Jim Jordan, who mumbles and slips up every time they ask him whether he talked to Trump on the day in question. Well, I talk to him all the time. Well, I don't know. I can't remember. And then he starts talking like Donald Duck and real fast. I mean, it's really freaky to watch him. He's been asked. Of course, he's going to refuse. And and I think they're doing a little bit of theater. They know none of the Republicans that the congressmen who were involved in this are going to actually agree to come on their own. But I think they want to have him refuse so that the public knows that they're trying to hide something. They're going to say, I don't accept the mandate or the legitimacy of this committee. And then they'll be subpoenaed. And then, of course, they can't be referred to the DOJ because they would have to be impeached. They, of course, there aren't 2/3 of the vote to eject them from Congress. There could be censorship or whatever, but that's not going to be too much. They can be kicked out of the committees. But there's probably already goods on them. And so they'll probably release that at a certain point, and then they'll complain and they'll say, well, we invited you here to talk about it and you refused to come. And that'll be right in the middle of the campaigns. And so it'll be very interesting. Now, Jordan, is probably not going to have too much of a hard time getting reelected unless there's a primary challenge against him. His district looks a lot different. There's going to be a lot of people in his district that didn't vote for him before. So we'll see what it looks like. That Duck district is gone. And so we'll see if he's got the same type of people supporting him. Not all Republicans are the same. You got a lot of people that are closer to Columbus. I don't know. I don't know what that makeup is. So if he gets a challenge from a never Trumper, I don't know what the story is there. But and I know that McConnell. And here's the other news, and I'll switch to you. McConnell is like hedging his bets. He's like saying, "Well, it will be interesting to see what is uncovered." I think he's already knows. I think probably Lynn Cheney has already given him a heads up, and the rest. But there's no way to lose there. No matter what it comes out, even if it's nothing, that's something the public should know, right? But it's very interesting that he's not taking the rest of the Republican line. That this is illegitimate. Aaron.
He's been playing. Mitch McConnell's been playing both sides of this, pretty much since the very beginning, and that's really uncharacteristic for him. He typically holds his line and sticks to the line and just makes everybody else the bad guy. And so to see him, of all people, playing both sides, that to me means that the heat is definitely coming. I've continued to tell people to not underestimate Liz Cheney. She has been put in the corner by her party. She's been pushed out by her state. She's definitely one of the least popular Republicans in the country right now, but she is still very much a legacy candidate, and she's got connections, and she's in a position of pretty substantial authority and power right now. The truth is not on the side of the Republican Party. They absolutely have to run out the clock, and that's what they're trying to do. They're hoping that the midterms will save them so that then this whole committee can be re-examined. But at the end of the day, the purposes of the committee are clear. They are going to investigate and report on the facts, circumstances, and causes of a domestic terrorist attack related to the peaceful transfer of power. Now, of course, the Stop the Steal crowd are going to say that it was not a peaceful transfer of power, that it was some kind of stolen election, in spite of the fact that there's no such evidence for this. You need some evidence for that in order for people to take your side. And so if we believe the evidence, which says that this was in fact a fairly won election, then we have a domestic terrorist attack on that election. And everyone in the country should be motivated in getting to the bottom, not only of what they did to prepare for this, which is where a lot of these investigations are going right now, leading to a lot of heat, but also, what about the response to it? The day of, we saw a catastrophic and violent threat to our Congress that took way too long to put down, that left many Americans feeling shaken and vulnerable in ways that we did not really feel were possible. I think that it's really fascinating that Perry and Flynn and all of these people are just referring to this as another distraction by the radical left. We sat through, 6 long investigations into Benghazi that spent an incredible amount of money that impacted far fewer people than this particular instance. So there's definitely plenty there. That what we have already heard read out loud is enough to make some people uncomfortable. And I especially think it will be interesting to see what happens, as more of it comes to light closer to the midterm elections.
Yeah, and I think they've already got stuff. I mean, McConnell doesn't say anything that isn't very calculated.
Right.
He's not an off-the-cuff kind of guy.
No.
He says stuff. Now, he also, I know in his head, wishes Trump would just vanish. He is a liability, and this particular group of Republicans are a liability. I'm sure he wishes Jordan was gone, Perry, Green, all of them. They are a liability to him. And so if he can get rid of them, he's happy. But it's not that easy. He can't take that kind of a stand without splitting the party and jeopardizing the possibility of retaking 2022, because it's sort of like you can't live with him, you can't live without him. If the Trump voters, it's not even just about primarying people in the early elections. If they sit out the election, they won't retake in 2022. They've got to be motivated. But Trump is demanding that this be, that the steal be the primary issue of 2022. They got to deal with that. He stayed quiet in Virginia. You know, that's how they were able to win that governor's race. If they hadn't done it, I mean, and he had a horrible candidate for the Democrats there, you know, telling parents they don't have any right to say what, you know, how their kids are educated. That ought to have been a sweep against them, and they still barely won. And, you know, and the only reason that the Republican pulled it off there is because Trump stayed out of it. And then Trump was bristling at the analysis that, hey, a good thing he stayed out of it. He doesn't like that. I don't think he'll have the discipline to stay out of it. So what are they going to do?
One of the more alarming things to me about Mitch McConnell's current stance is the only thing more dangerous to him than Donald Trump is apparently the Democratic Party. He has decided to just ride this one out. It has been clear that they've wanted to get rid of Trump from the minute that he showed up, you know, riding down that escalator to take over their party. They have just been completely incapable of doing that. And you're right, Trump is definitely going to make this the thing in the midterms and in the upcoming presidential election. And the Republican Party is going to have to decide whether or not that is their cause or not. They can continue to kind of play both sides for now, but the choice is going to have to be made sooner rather than later. And if history is any guide, we could be seeing the sun setting on people like Mitch McConnell and Liz Cheney. I still think the old school Republican Party has some fight left in it, but they have not put up much of a fight against Trumpism so far.
All right. And they risk losing the centrist independents.
Yep, a huge branch of their party. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, even the non-independents outside the party that might vote for him. All right. That takes us to the next topic related. Okay. Moving out of Congress and going into private litigation and criminal litigation. The sentences are increasing. The judges in the past have been complaining that the prosecutors of the Department of Justice haven't been asking for big enough sentences. They've been saying you're letting these people get off cheaply. These even the fines are nothing compared to the damage that they did to the Capitol building. What are you doing? You know, and they're saying I don't have any choice. I can't go much above what you asked for, and you keep having these lower sentences. We're kind of locked in. Well, they're starting to go higher. We had a sentence of 5 years and 4 years, the two longest sentences so far. They were particularly violent. One guy, you know, used fire hydrant and twice picked it up after he sprayed them, and then threw something else like a spear at them, and then, you know, claimed it was self-defense because he got hit in the stomach with a rubber bullet, and then picked it up and threw it. I mean, just completely out of control. Showed some remorse, but didn't show it on social media. These guys, you know, aren't the brightest bulbs, and anyway, so they're getting they're starting to have bigger sentences. You might see a few more, a little bit more plea bargaining and maybe more testimony. Meanwhile, the Oath Keepers who are organizing this are facing felony charges for organizing, and that's a little bit more serious, for actually interfering with a public process. That might tie in to the actual January 6th committee, because that's going beyond vandalism, of trespassing, and just those basic charges. That's going on to the central question of what was the point of this, and was there any organization? It kind of contradicts the FBI's earlier reports of no evidence of a coordinated, you know, insurrection type thing. They are, if they're being charged with that type of interference, you know, and then somewhat related, we'll talk about it later, but Fox News also got hit. They were hoping to have the Dominion lawsuit for defamation dismissed on the basis of Dominion being of it being an issue of public importance, and so far they're saying no, that's not going to be a defense here. Pardon me, of Dominion being a public figure and wanting to have the New York Times defense, the New York Times versus Sullivan. They may still get that in one hand, but so far they've lost that, and Fox News might have to get its checkbooks out along with OAN and Newsmax because Dominion sent them letters saying this isn't true. We can send you the evidence, and Fox ignored them. It's going to be going to be interesting. But let's get back to the other court decisions. And I forgot to mention, related to the January 6th committee also, is that Michael Flynn, this was the first, there's a bunch of the Trump people that are filing lawsuits to try to get the committee to get off their backs. Michael Flynn lost his attempt to get it dismissed, the subpoenas dismissed. He'll probably try to do it again, but so far he's lost. So a lot going on in the courts. So far, not good news for the sedition squad.
No, but remarkably kind of quiet at the same time. Like you said, we're hearing a lot of judges saying that these prosecutors are going for charges that are too light. Personally, I'm very critical of the entire prison industrial complex, but I think that there's something deeply wrong with a society that will punish people far harsher for distributing grams of cannabis or something like that than they will for what is very clearly a coordinated attack on our government. There were flyers, there was a particular date, there was a rally ahead of time, everybody had a banner with the same person's name on it. Even if Antifa was the so-called Antifa was somehow infiltrating this group, that's a form of coordination.
There you go.
Which requires evidence and fact-finding for us to
understand. Why isn't Antifa on trial? Or why aren't there?
Right.
Why aren't they
exactly caught? Right. And it's because, lo and behold, there's no evidence that says that they were responsible for this. And there is not only mountains of private evidence from what we are finding, but also just a tremendous amount of public evidence. We all saw before our eyes what happened on January 6th and who was responsible for that. And I think that while it is a delicate dance for this country to try to have our democracy and keep it too, so to speak, there needs to be punishments for this. There needs to be a way of saying, if you break into Congress while they are trying to count votes for the sake of stopping that vote counting, that's an extreme attack on our institutions. Vandalizing Congress is one thing. Breaking in to stop an election is something completely different. And I understand it's hard for them to make those connections, but in many of these cases, they're very clear, and the punishment is just not fitting the crime, I think, in a lot of people's eyes.
Yeah. And there was a little bit of a comment that happened in the motion in the Oath Keepers, one that Trump ought to be concerned about, is that the Oath Keepers are saying, well, how come these charges aren't being filed against Trump and his associates, they argued. And the judge says, well, they're not parties to these proceedings. That was the answer. So, there's a little bit happening there, and, they don't have immunity. It's going to be a question of, does Merrick Garland, does he have the chutzpah? That's, right. If the evidence is there, and, does the January 6th committee have the evidence, even if the Congress flips at that point? Will he have the evidence to start prosecuting certain people?
The evidence is there. It'll have to move the right number of people. It has plainly moved Liz Cheney. It has, plainly moved Mitch McConnell. And these are no nonsense people. I do think the question is just how bad is it? And how substantial of an impact does that have on the electorate of particular people who are running at the time? And that's just a little too complex for me to view right now. But it's a train coming down a mountain with a full head of steam, that's for sure.
Yeah, and again, we've got a lot more defendants to go, and I'll be really interested to see what happens with this Oath Keepers, and I want to see as they start making deals, was there any coordination? I want to hear about this offer of pardons that the one congressman did, and there's a reason that Lynn Cheney was not giving the names out of those emails that she was reading off. Of course, the Federalist Society inadvertently outed Jim Jordan, poor guy, when in their article, and of course what the Federalist Society was saying is, well, they didn't mention was that it wasn't his idea. He got the idea from another right-wing lawyer, blah blah blah. So it just and of course that all they're saying is, yeah, he's too dumb to come up with the idea on his own. It's just this is you can't make this stuff up. It is going to be theater, and I do think it could have an effect on the Republicans if they don't take the McConnell position. If a lot of the Republican moderates who are, people who are running to take office don't say, well, if they say it's illegitimate and a lot of this stuff is coming out, they better say, I don't know. But they risk the chance of alienating Trump voters. They've got a tightrope to walk, and they're not all going to be in the same position as the governor, the soon-to-be governor in Virginia.
Yeah, you mentioned Jim Jordan talks really fast when he gets nervous. I've coached intercollegiate speech and debate for like 15 years, and he looks just like a novice debater trying to make time. He goes real fast. He repeats himself a lot. He clearly has something that he's worried about. Something's on his mind when he's trying to answer these questions, and he's not going to tell us what it is. Just one quick touch on this. Other folks that maybe said a little too much when they shouldn't have are, like you said, our Fox News, Newsmax, these folks. Really fascinating lawsuit here about the relationship between the First Amendment and defamation. The Supreme Court has not come down on this. There are circuit court decisions that basically argue that just because it is a First Amendment issue, that does not protect the news from defamation. But you could see a conservative court coming down the other way, and that is what we have right now. And so it would be really interesting to see a kind of broadening of First Amendment relaxation in the name of like kind of Trumpist news production, which is potentially what we're looking at here if this elevates to that level.
Yeah, but it cuts both ways. Mm-hmm. I mean, they've got, that's the whole problem.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, we'll take that up again soon. But that takes us to another topic.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
Okay, Omicron. That's the big news, except that people are just tired of it. We talked about the COVID fatigue last week. Biden has issued big warnings. There's all kinds of warnings. People hunker down, but nobody wants to shut down again. People are tired of hearing about it. They're even being told, don't use the cloth masks if you go to anywhere that's particularly crowded. It's just not cutting it for this particular variant. It's a lot more infectious, not as deadly. It's not killing as many people. But, people seem to be getting over it, especially if you're vaccinated and boosted. Apparently, it's pretty mild for most people, unless you've got some really bad conditions or just happen to be very unlucky. But it is spreading like wildfire. I mean, people got it. People in Congress are getting it. People, in the cabinet are getting it. People close to Biden are getting it. Biden tested negative today, but somebody in his airplane got it. Somebody close to Harris got it. I mean, it's just spreading like crazy. And the concern is that it's going to be flooding hospitals again over the next few weeks. And they are asking people, and of course it is Christmas, and then it'll be New Year's. And it's wearing people out. That a possible silver lining is that people may not travel as much. People may kind of stay home. Offices are going back to working at home, and there might not be as much traffic on the streets. That might ease up gas prices again, and it might ease up on inflation as if people are not. Gas tends to be at the bottom of everything, makes everything more expensive, They might depend more on services rather than spending as they did before when they were in house. That could help things out that way. But other than that, it's going to slow down the growth of the economy unless people just are tired of hearing about it and is just going to say, you know what, if we die, we die. We can't deal with this anymore. It's got to end. Aaron?
Yeah, one of the things I keep saying to my students is it's totally okay to be, tired of viruses and variants, but they're not tired of you. That's not how they work. This is a global health emergency. We are facing one of the largest challenges to our national stability that we've seen in a very long time. In just, a year and a bit, a little over, a year and a half, 2 years or whatever, it's killed more people than the American Civil War. I don't think it's okay for us to, I understand it. I'm over it. I'm sick of it. But it's just such a weird thing to hear people say. I feel like we lose context on not only how many people have died, but the threat that it has. It is a mild form of a variant, and we are very fortunate for that. But it does impact people a lot. And just because people don't die, that doesn't mean it doesn't maybe inhibit you from getting access to health care when you go to a hospital that is too crowded.
That's right.
With people that are demanding necessary attention that could have been avoided.
Don't get into a car accident.
Exactly right. Right. And hope your blood pressure stays right where it's at for now, until this thing slows down. I think that if people had, taken it more seriously at the beginning, if we were more willing to vaccinate, if we were more willing to respect the global experts, then the risk would have, been much lower. I saw one thing talk about how one of the reasons the markets are kind of shaky right now is that we failed this test twice in 2 years. We had 2 cracks at this. And if this were a hot disease, it would have been catastrophic. It would have been absolutely catastrophic. It doesn't take this long for a lethal variant or for a deadly variant to do damage. And we're very fortunate that the last 2 times have gone as well as they have, in spite of how difficult it's been. And the economy is holding up. As you mentioned, Dana Peterson and Barron's is talking about how people are like really binge buying right now. We're seeing, that return, which is kind of good for the economy. We have seen an earnings bonanza. If you're one of those people in, the places that are making a bunch of money, like tech companies and things, you're doing pretty well. The public money that's kind of flooded from the markets has been supplanted by private money. We're seeing investments stay put because the value of the assets aren't going anywhere. It's just the ability to ship them. It's some of the chips and things that go into them. So while the public is losing a share of the market value, the private money going in is increasing, which means the economy is level. It's less for everyone else and more for the people that have the most of our economy. But just in macro numbers, it stabilizes. And the same article says we've seen a real boom in green technology as a result of this. Consumer confidence continues to be very, very high. And as long as that's the case, we're going to be okay. Economically, this does not seem like it's too big of a problem. As far as symptoms, as far as consequence, people keep saying it's not too big of a problem. And personally, I think that's the most alarming thing about all of it. Like I said, it shut down the whole government in a circumstance that we haven't seen since like a major world war time. It's killed over 800,000 people. It has, sent multiple, communities out of work, out of their homes. It's upended all sorts of things. And we continue to be like, oh, this isn't so bad. If you haven't already, get vaccinated. If you haven't already, get boosted. Just because you hear that these masks may not work, you should continue to wear masks, get good masks, and socially and physically distance from people, because this continues to be a problem, and we don't want to fail a 3rd test in a row.
It's been said, I was reading statistics, if 20 million more people had gotten vaccinated last spring, we would not be totally out of the woods, but we would be a lot less in this country. If the first world had really worked, the industrialized world had really worked to make sure the vaccinations had gotten to places in Africa and other places that are less, we might not have an Omicron or a Delta variant.
Right.
That should have been a major policy of our own interests. If we should have demanded that the vaccine companies set it up. There are technologies set up down there, technological industries that could be making it down there, and they haven't done that. They haven't allowed for that to happen. I mean, it's just, so it's just hard to get out of, because you've got entire countries that have barely vaccinated anybody. And so between those 2 factors, and I'm sorry, the idiot factor up here of people who are just going to, as I've said, I'm glad that there was no internet around when the polio vaccine came out. I mean, I'm really glad, or we'd still have a lot of kids in those machines. I mean, it's just, it really is disturbing that you get so many people, and some of them really smart, just being so idiotic. And it's a shame, and they're still doing it. Now, I was really glad to see Biden. I think he kind of played on Trump's ego, thanking the former president for bringing us the vaccine so quickly. And then Trump said, wow, that's great. He complimented me. Yeah, thank you for complimenting me. Yes, it's a great thing we have these vaccines. Everybody should go out and get them, right? That play to a narcissist and get it. Maybe that'll save a few lives. Maybe some of his, followers will say, oh gosh, maybe I should go get it. Maybe too little, too late. If he'd done this early on, maybe it would have been better, but he kind of backed off it himself. His daughter goes and says, I got vaccinated, and they turned on her on Twitter. Why didn't he defend his daughter?
Trump himself got booed for saying he got boosted. And, I do think that the internet has, in many ways magnified it, but this is not new. I've been doing a little bit of research just recently on the anti-vaccination societies in the United States, and they go way back, and there's definitely materials advertising about the polio vaccine, about the smallpox vaccine. And one of the things I do as a communication professor is study rhetoric, which is like the shape arguments take over time. And what I will tell you is this argument sounds almost identical. The people that are saying that they don't believe in the science, and the people that are saying that they want to have control over their body and all of these, or they fear the big government and all the conspiracies, it's the same debate that we had in the 1900s. It's the same debate that we had in the 1920s. People continue to take the same, ill-guided stance, and it continues to cost people lives. And hopefully, again, it's not worse the next time around. It can always get worse.
Yeah,
global pandemics can be incredibly effective, and so far we're just lucking out.
There was an anti-mask society in the Spanish flu one. They had to fight that back then. There was actually a famous Humboldt County sign of nurses say, "Please wear your mask." So yeah, it's not new. It's always and you always have these people saying, "Oh, I want my freedom, my liberty, blah blah blah." They talk big and tough about not wearing masks, but they won't resist the draft. Signing up for the draft registration. They'll just wimp out when it comes to anything that's actually real.
You'll see it linked with anti-fluoridation arguments also at the same time. And I think it's really frustrating when people demand, all the rights and privileges of their liberty without understanding that liberty is the product of a United States of America. We are a republic, and that republic requires that everybody, takes certain kinds of commitments in stride so that we can maintain the national security and the national order. We understood this pretty well after pretty much every so-called terrorist attack, but a global pandemic for some reason is different, and it's really unfortunate.
Right. Anyway, more on that later. We're going on to our next topic.
I think I've made mistakes. Every time somebody says I made a mistake, they do the polls and my numbers go up. So I guess I haven't made any mistakes.
We showed up and we demonstrated that we would not have our voices silenced by a Republican Party that across the country had a singular intention on suppressing the right to vote.
Some Democratic senators seem to imagine they could just break the rules on a razor-thin majority. Nothing would stand between them and their entire agenda, a new era of fast-track policy making.
The Republican Party moved very far away from reality. And the fact that you got colleagues of mine in the Senate who refuse even today to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost the election. How do you deal with that?
Joe Biden is the president we need right now. Battle-tested, forward-looking, honest and authentic. He has never forgotten who he is fighting for.
Okay, last topic. California redistricting. The final map is in. Great news for the North Coast. Our district is not changed. They heard us. There had been talks about having us, our district merge with, and LaMofa become our congressman and merge with Redding and all of the counties over there. We would become probably a Republican district. Then the Yurok and tribe would be in there, the Klamath River, and all of that we would not have as good advocacy to protect those river interests and the coastal interests. We convinced them that we have a unique community of interest going from in the so-called 707 district. The district will still run from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border. And in as far as Trinity County, So that will not change. And it does look like, unlike the previous maps, John Garamendi does not get stuffed in to have to compete with Mike Thompson. So he actually gets to be saved. The people with problems are mostly down in the southern part of the state. One of the big of the people who might have a hard time getting reelected, the only Democrat, Juan Vargas has basically been, lives near San Diego, and he had a district that goes into Imperial County. We have one less congressional district because although we increased in numbers, we didn't increase as fast as other states. So we've actually lost a district. And so we will lose one Democratic heavy district, although I do believe we're actually going to pick up Democratic districts in 2022. If Democrats lose the majority, it will not happen in California. We could pick up as many as 4, possibly 5 districts, and I've talked about why, and we can talk about that again. But he is out because he is now basically in Darrell Issa's map, and it is a completely Republican district. So he's out, and Raul Ruiz, who is probably in strong, takes over most of his former district. Katie Porter has had a little bit of issue of possibly getting reelected. Actually, it looks like she's not doing so badly. Actually, this new map, I think they did her a favor with this one. That was right. Oh, okay. She was not looking so good in the others. There is an open favor Republican seat because there's no current incumbent living in it. The 40th district looks like to the east of Los Angeles, maybe incorporating a little bit of Orange County. So that's wide open. And but Devin Nunes, he knew what was coming. He, after suing a fictitious cow and a lot of people and basically working with Trump very closely, he is now in a very Democratic, his district is now very much Democratic. He saw the writing on the wall. He couldn't move over into Kevin McCarthy's district. He certainly wouldn't have a chance there. So he's retired from Congress, and his district will now become very Democratic. David Valadao, who had an upset win in a Democratic district. His district is now much more Democratic than it was. And let's remind you, this was not put together by Democrats. This was put together by an independent commission passed by I think it was Proposition 11 in 2008. And it's even people from both sides of the party, plus a few independents or a few non-Republicans and Democrats. But it's just the way that it falls. It's a very Democratic state. And when things have to get moved around, it just isn't going to benefit Republicans, who basically are their strongholds are in the valley and up in the mountains. And outside in the suburbs of San Diego. So it looks like, Orange County, which used to be a Republican stronghold, there just aren't many left. And you've got a couple of Republicans down there who are incumbents who, because of the changes, are probably going to lose. Michael Steele and Young Kim are now in the same district. One of them are going to lose, and probably whoever wins their primary are going to lose to whatever Democrat runs in that one. And Ken Calvert, Republican incumbent, he will probably win, but his district is a little tougher. It's just Democrats have been moving into these. There was another Republican I thought that Mike Garcia. He's a Republican incumbent. He's going to have a hard time running. And this is, by the way, by 538 standards, which I think are actually skewed towards Republicans because they're based on 2020 results, which brought out a lot of Trump voters who I think may not turn out this time around. And it doesn't take into account the get out the vote models that the Democrats used in the recall election, which made them outperform all of the polls by like 10 points. So anyway, I just I want to get a lot of that out. Looking really good for Democrats in California. Aaron.
Yeah, I think that that's a really, really great synopsis. A lot of people, when it comes to districting, are kind of up in the air in terms of like what's even going on. And one of the things I tell people is, the census is really important because it tells us how many people there are, but districting determines representation. It determines who gets to be represented, and so it's really, really crucial. And I think that the summary about the effect that it has here on the North Coast is really solid. I think that there are interests out here, particularly as you mentioned, indigenous interests that are definitely not well represented by the Democratic Party, but that are better represented by the Democratic Party than the Republican Party. And if you were to lump us in with Reading and some of those other places, those interests would get overlooked. And there are a lot of, very conservative Republican people out here that feel that their interests are overlooked right now as a result of the way the current district is situated. And again, it's like that's why districting has so much power and why it's such an important conversation. And every 10 years, we kind of go through this process. There's a great summary that I find by Samin Kamal from Cal Matters. Basically, the takeaway here that I think is interesting is that you have potentially they say that the Republicans need 7 seats in the Assembly to end the Democrat supermajority and 5 seats in the Senate to end the Democrat supermajority. The Democrats apparently are taking gains in the Assembly, but up to 3 losses in the Senate. And so while people say this is really, really good for the Democratic Party, as you yourself mentioned, there are contractions here. This was a nonpartisan process as far as, the way that it's built based on a proposition here in California. We all know how that happens. One of the questions that I have for you before we run out of time is, do you think we should change this process? It was like over 60,000 people wrote in and gave feedback, and that creates this huge mess, this huge headache. But that's what we want, right? Is all that feedback? Isn't the mess kind of the point here with democracy?
Well, the only way we can change it is by another ballot proposition. I actually screamed against it back in 2008. I said we can't unilaterally disarm. I advocated, sure, we can do this, but let's have it done when an equal amount of electoral college votes of Republican states pass something similar. Right.
Yeah,
because they're gerrymandering like crazy throughout the South and the rest, but we just kind of, go, but it passed overwhelmingly. So it would have to be done. I would be all for setting it aside and retaining it until such a time as, it's done across the country. But
yeah, fingers crossed for that one.
Yeah.
That definitely doesn't seem to be the way the river's flowing right now.
No, and as I've talked about in the past, I mean, Democrats are going to gerrymander where they can still gerrymander. They've done it in Illinois.
Yeah.
They're pulling what Republicans are doing in the South and probably New York.
Yeah, we've learned this again and again in our republic. It's not the number of votes that makes, a winner. It's representation, and districting is where it's at. And so that's where the action's going to be.
All right, this takes us to the last part of our show for predictions. Aaron, what have you got?
Well, mine's pretty tame. A lot of people are hoping Build Back Better is going to come back, that Manchin's maybe not yet. I'm seeing multiple people say a hard no is maybe a not yet from him. You mentioned Romney's counterproposal. I'm going to be the Grinch. My prediction is it's dead. It's dead. And if we get something passed in the new year, it's going to be a ghost of the Christmas past. It's not going to be even close to the same thing. How about you?
I was looking for to see if anything had changed since this afternoon, but I agree. I think it's dead. I think maybe some of the programs may be passed piecemeal. I think he's going to block anything pertaining to climate change. I think we're just going to have to wait for another date, unfortunately, which is really bad news for the climate. But I do think that we probably will get pre-K kindergarten passed through, and and a few items like that. I do think that he is going to sort of feel pressured to do some type of filibuster reform, not overturn it entirely, but maybe return to a talking one so that at least the Republicans are put on the defensive of having to defend the Jim Crow laws that they've kind of passed that are going to make it difficult, and they would be hard to defend in that situation. And maybe we can get some type of voter reform law passed that way. At some point, I don't know. We'll see. But I do think that there's going to be a press on that because Manchin is going to want to get back into good graces and find some way to get back into good graces. Maybe he'll even say, you know what, you rejected. I tried to come up with something that the Republicans could do. He did have a bill, and the Republicans just totally threw cold water on it, shut it down without a discussion. So maybe he'll use that as an excuse and just figure, he's got to do something to get back into good graces because nobody, as we discussed early, nobody trusts him. Nobody.
You've already mentioned this, and I wanted to ask you when I had you, but you think censure is probably the worst thing that's going to happen with January 6th, right? Censure and maybe like electoral fallback. That's the worst thing that's going to happen, right?
You need 2/3 of the House to expel somebody from
right.
the House, and you need 60 votes of the Senate to impeach him. So
it'd have to be a heck of a piece of evidence sitting under Liz Cheney's chair there. I don't know.
Yeah. All right, I want to thank Aaron for stepping in Dave's absence, his holiday absence, and I just want to ask everybody to stay informed and stay engaged. Until next time.